Welcome back to another episode of Advanced RC Adventures. A2RC here. This is a channel where we investigate, explore, build and explain, upgrade and advance Nitro RCs to another level. Come start another adventure with me. So as we continue our HPI RS4 adventure, we're talking about brakes today. We have a number of different options and style brakes. We're going to go over some basic adjustments with the brake block. We're going to talk about fiber disc brakes. We're going to talk about carbon fiber brakes. We're going to talk about steel brakes, stock brakes, some linkage and adjustments, and some tips and some tricks to help you guys take your RS4 braking system to another level. So let's start out by taking a look at the entire transmission assembly here for a second. So this has a brand new fiber disc brake, which is actually a big upgrade from the stock plastic one. We've seen transmissions before. You may have worked on these cars before, but we have a transmission shaft that runs through the center of the spur, driven by the pulleys. We have brake pads. We have a brake cam lever. We have the brake block itself, and when it's attached to the drivetrain, the spur rotates, the brake disc rotates, and when we need to stop, we need a way to do that. With Nitro, it's generally with a brake system. There's a lever that goes inside of that brake cam. And it's attached to a linkage. Here's a little mock-up linkage. We have a piece going to a servo horn going to the servo, and we'll have some type of adjustment piece. There's two different basic adjustment pieces that came with the RS4s. We have a smaller plastic one, and we have a longer one that came with the Ready to Run 2. They both are good, and it depends on what you're going for and what your system needs in order to know which one that you want to utilize. The smaller one has a benefit that you can have it closer or further down the shaft if that's needed, in case your brake link is a little bit too long and maybe running into your shock. But the con is that it is rather small and it's harder to get your fingers on. The Ready to Run 2 version is a little bit longer. They helped with the adjustment and grip itself, but it is longer, and at times you don't need that length. And the threads are only partial down inside of the plastic portion. There's actually a gaping hole in the back that you're not actually using for thread grip or strength. So it just kind of depends on what you want. It comes generally with a stock spring, but what I like to do is upgrade to a piece of fuel tubing. This has a little bit better squish to it and a little bit better brake feel than the spring, and there's nothing to rust. So if you're running your spring still, give a piece of silicone fuel tubing a try, and you'll have to play with the length on what is needed for your particular setup. One piece that I don't know if a lot of people use or know about, but this little black plastic piece, it's cone-like on one side and flat on the other. And this helps to align your force onto that little cam lever piece. It's got a cone shape on one, so it fits down inside of the circle or the hole that is made with that curled piece of metal, and it just helps to center and put force directly inside of that hole. Whereas if you didn't have it, that rod and your spring or your silicone fuel tubing could be all around there, and it may affect the way or the consistency at which your braking happens. Let's just dive into one little tip and tweak. So on these pieces of metal. They are fully round, but what I like to do, and I don't know if you can see, but I colored it black. What I like to do is I put a flat, I grind a flat on top of here so that the set screw that's inside of the cam itself can grip onto that, and it helps for it not to rotate as you apply force onto this little cam lever here. So that's just a small tip. You do have to play with it to make sure that you get this perfectly on top so that it's not slightly turned one way or another. So that'll take a little bit, but you only need a small amount of grind. When you look at the flat, I would say at minimum you need maybe like 1/8 of an inch, and at maximum, I don't know, not much more than that. You don't want to grind all the way down to half of piece of metal. That's gone too far. You just need some amount of flat for that set screw, that grub screw, to sit on top and help you out. So that's just a little tip and trick there. We're going to talk about disc, but let's talk about brake pads. The brake pads for all the RS4 models are metal. They are steel, and generally speaking, you can have 2 times the length or life out of them by taking them off and flipping them, and the wear parts will now be on the other side. You can also sand them and put them back into life as well. Every once in a while you need to make sure that they stay flat. You might have to hammer them flat again, but generally speaking they work pretty well. All the brake blocks have 2 screws or bolts on them, and this adjustment is actually pretty important. Let's go ahead and take at the stock brake disc. The stock brake disc piece of plastic. It's relatively thin. Let's go ahead and measure it. So it looks like it's just about 2 millimeter. And that's important to talk about because the brake discs come in various thicknesses and various diameters. And so the stock setting that HPI recommends for here is for the stock one to be somewhere about 18 or 18.5 millimeter. And that's between the top of the bolt here to the back side of the plastic. And that's for both the top and the bottom bolt. So you measure from here to the back side of the plastic, and for the stock, you want it to be 18.5 millimeter. These plastic brake discs, they do fine. They definitely do the job, but we're going to talk about some other brake disc that will provide a little bit better braking for your Nitro RS4. Let's go into the fiber disc brakes. There were actually 3 different versions that I'm aware. This is the version that came with the Racer 2, and it's more uniform in the material, and the diameter is the same diameter as your black plastic. And here we can measure that. It's important to measure just to give you some insight. So let's call that 34 millimeter in diameter. So, but when we compare it to this later fiber disc brake, it actually has pieces of brass inside. So similar to full-scale brake pads that have metal inside of the pads themselves, it's the same kind of thought process on extra friction. So, but take a look at the size. They are not the same size. So the small or the large one was 34 millimeter. This small one is 31 millimeter. Now the thickness itself is going to be about the same. We're just about 4 millimeter on the small fiber disc brake, and the same, just under 4 millimeter. Let's call it 4 millimeter. So when you use these thicker disc brakes around the 4 millimeter mark, the setting for these bolts change. And so instead of 18.5 from here to here, now we're at 20. You need to lengthen the screw, unscrew the screw out to provide more space in between those two brake pads, and the measurement that you want to start at is right about 20 millimeter from the top of the bolt to the back side of that brake block. So that's something important to note. And then it's up to you on how you like and how you want it to adjust it from there. So, and then this is just an example of that multimedia kind of metal with fiber disc brake. We have the larger one and the smaller version. So that's up to you. The larger diameter will give you a little bit more braking force because you have more surface area on the circumference. The larger diameter, you have a longer circumference for the disc brake, and that'll give you a little bit more grip strength. But it depends on what your needs are. This is a little bit shorter one, same thickness, but a little bit less diameter, and it'll give a little bit less grip on your disc. And depending on what track or situation you want, maybe you want that would be your preference. So those are fiber disc brakes. Let's go ahead and take a look at some carbon fiber examples. Here is a brand new GPM version. We have some drilled holes in here, and that is to help with some brake disc dust to be expelled. Same thickness around that 4 millimeter and the same larger diameter as the other one. Here's another version. This is the larger diameter, but this is thinner. This is 3 millimeter. So we talked about 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter. Here's our 2 millimeter stock, 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter. So you would want to adjust your brake pad screws a little bit different, maybe around 19 millimeter from the back of your brake block to your screw head. So, but these have bigger holes and they're chamfered on both sides, full carbon fiber. And these carbon fiber disc, one, they look a little bit nicer, and in general they break with a similar amount of force to these fiber disc ones. But to be fair, these fiber disc pads work really well with the steel brake pads. You should really give these a try. They're a great upgrade. If you want something a little more flashier, if you have a carbon fiber build going on, then this is a perfect piece to put on there. And then here we go. Here's another carbon fiber one, but notice that we have slots instead of holes, and they're a little bit angled going around the circumference or the diameter of the carbon fiber, but this is a smaller diameter. So let's look at, for contrast here, take a look at the fiber disc. Notice it's a smaller diameter. So it's the same diameter as the other small fiber disc. So lots of different options. So the same situation, if you want that carbon fiber, but you want it to be a little bit less in diameter, to be able to have a different type of brake feel, then you would utilize that smaller carbon fiber disc. And I have this particular one on one of my full carbon fiber RS4s, and it works pretty well. And then let's talk about one of the more accelerated or iconic brake disc updates or upgrades, and that's from RRP, Robertson Racing Products. And there were two versions of this disc that came out. Same purple anodized adapter, but the disc itself was different. These are like a helical kind of drill. The other ones that I have on the purple RS4, instead of it being like a helical grind, we have 1 and 2, and then it moves over in 1 and 2 and moves over 1 and 2, and that still gives a great amount of holes so that the brake dust can be expelled. But since this is metal, they use two different kinds of material for the brake pads. You still use your metal pads, but then you put these on in between them, and it sandwiches in between the disc. So they had two different styles, two different flavors, two different grips, the yellow and the red. The red was a little bit more aggressive than the yellow, but they both worked pretty well. The instructions were to glue them onto the brake pads themselves, but honestly, in my 20 plus years of using this style of brake pad, you generally do not need to do that. Leave them free floating and they work really well also. So here's that disc again. This is one of the more sought after kind of updates, and these are relatively thin. Let's measure this disc. So this is under 1.5. Let's round it up and call it 1.5. So it doesn't need to be as thick in order to have grip strength. And then you have to sandwich in these brake pads as well, so it needs more room. So that's a part of why this disc is a little bit thinner. But it's super stylish, looks great. So many people on their display cars as well as cars that they run. For example, on purple RS4 that I showed you in the last video, these RRP discs work really well. These also can be refinished. I don't know if it shows on camera, but the surface here is a little scuffed from over the years. You can take it all apart, put it on a sanding stone, clean that all up, polish it up, and it can be ready to go. Reassemble it, and it's perfect to go again. So this is just a short video giving you some tips and tricks and some introduction on different style brake disc, a little bit of tuning, a little bit of information on setup, just for you for your vintage HPI Nitro RS4 adventures. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you like anything 10 scale, nitro, and especially touring cars, then this is the place to be. So thanks for taking the adventure with me.